You're probably wondering what neo-romantics mean. Romanticism was a movement that started at the beginning of the 19th century as a reaction against the Enlightenment theory that everything could be explained by science. And what people were trying to do was get back to a sense of nature, magic, imagination. Not everything could be done by numbers. And that led to things as various as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story, Romanticism in painting, literature, various fields, music. In the 20th century, in the years from 1900 to 1940, there were several art movements, but the one that was dominating was Cubism. And in the war years and immediately afterwards, a group of young artists felt that Cubism wasn't the way to the future, and they wanted to get back to the romantic ideal, to put more imagination into their work, not have it all defined by mathematics. And they started what is now known as the neo-romantic movement. It started with people like Henry Moore. So you've got these two themes. You've got pastoral scenes, romantic figure drawing, and people in strange situations. The other thing was, in the war years and immediately afterwards, everything was austere, drab, blackout, no leisure time. And they wanted to get back to a sense of freedom and colour. And you'll see in at least a number of these pictures that sense of liberation, if you like, from the austerity of the war years. So we start here with one of Keith Thorne's greatest works, and we're very lucky to have 10 original drawings from a book called The Spirit of Jem. And this is a fantasy story. It's almost science fiction. And you've got a synopsis of the story on the wall. And it starts with a young boy who wakes up in a strange countryside, having lost his memory, not knowing who he is or where he is. He meets another character who's in the same predicament. They then meet this character called Jem, who claims to be in the same predicament, but they don't really trust him. But they pick up a boxer from a boxing booth who doesn't really want to have to punch people because he's a gentle soul, and he joins them, and they have various adventures. And I'm told that in the end, the story actually isn't terribly satisfactory because outside agencies just come in and rescue them. It's a typical neo-romantic theme, and I think you can see the typical figure drawing, which is not realistic, it's not abstract either, it's not cubist. It is distorted to show emotion. And then we come to John Minton, probably the greatest artist of the period, and a book called Time Was Away. He went with a writer called Alan Ross to Corsica for a couple of months, and they toured around the island, and the book is a diary of their travels. What we have here, 2 drawings from the book, original drawings, and then the 8 colour plates, which a collector we know had mounted and framed, and which I think make a wonderful display and give you a real feel for the variety of form and shape. Semi-abstract, I mean, there is still an element of cubism in some of the drawings, but it's not dominant. Then we have some more Minton here. This is a cover he made for a Christmas number of The Listener. The publisher of Time Was Away was a man called John Lehman, who was a leading publisher of neo-romantic illustrators, among other things. He was also a poet, publisher of avant-garde writers. And he produced an anthology called Orpheus. And the first volume of it, we see the design for the cover by Keith Thorne. And below is the color design and the black separation for the second volume, which was done by John Minton. The black framed picture, which has come from the Victoria and Albert Museum, is 2 drawings by a very good illustrator called Leonard Rosserman. He wasn't 100% neo-romantic. He had his own style, but in the 50s, he did a lot of drawings for the Radio Times in a style that was very much influenced by the Neo-Romantics. And then the other pictures on that wall are by Edward Borden. You've got 3 jacket designs in colour. You've also got an illustration in black and white that was designed to go on the dust wrapper of a book. And you've got a title page for one of the aerial poems, W.H. Auden's Mountains, which Borden also illustrated. Right, here we have 3 drawings by Michael Ayrton. He was an important artist, illustrator, broadcaster, critic of the period. The first 2 drawings are from a book called The Unfortunate Traveller by Thomas Nash, which is one of the very first novels written in the English language. It's a very macabre book, lots of scenes of torture and misfortune, and very much romantic in the Frankenstein sense of the word. And again, it's slightly weird. And then beyond, a very interesting artist called Robin Jakes, 3 drawings by him. He was a merchant seaman during the Second World War, had no artistic training, but came out, loved drawing, wanted to be an artist, and started making illustrations. And here we have 2 drawings from Don Quixote. I don't know how many of you know the book, but there's a scene where a clown is tossed in a blanket, and what we see there is the clown flying into the air, up head over heels. That is drawn at the same size as it was published in the book, which was quite unusual. Most artists drew larger scale and had the drawings reduced to make them finer. That, I think, is incredible work, both in skill of the craftsmanship of drawing in that amount of detail, but also in the freedom and the imagination that's gone into the illustrations. And it was very sad, really. Interviewed in about 1960, Robin Jakes said, I would like to take 2 years off and reappraise my style because I feel I'm getting stale. But he didn't get those 2 years off. He was dependent on publishers giving him contracts to keep him going. And he never got that opportunity to stand back and think again about how he was working. We've then got 2 drawings in the black frames there by an artist called Julian Trevelyan. He was a leading member of the St Ives School. Didn't do much illustration. These are a set of drawings that were then made into engravings and published in a portfolio. And it's called A Time, a Place. And then in the middle, one of the stars of the show, I think, it's a set of 4 drawings by Henry Moore that we've borrowed from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And they are for a book called The Rescue, written by Edward Sackville West. And then a little group of works by lesser-known artists of the period and of the school, very much in the pastoral vein. The 2 little tiny drawings are from 6 Scenes in Wales by John Elwyn. Then 2 drawings for dust wrapper designs by an artist called Eric Fraser. He's not normally grouped with the Neo-Romantics, but he was a very competent illustrator who went through a number of styles in his life and who, in the early 50s, was very much in the Neo-Romantic tradition. My favourite is Short Lease, and I love the idea of the house and then the spirit of the place kind of keeping everyone safe inside it. And he's used watercolour and ink to draw the main drawing, and then the figure of the spirit is in pencil, which gives it an ethereal quality. He did a lot of work for Radio Times as well, well known in illustration circles, not so well known in the art world. The inspiration for this exhibition came from a booklet that was written by Rigby Graham. So we've got the original drawing he made for the cover of the booklet, which was published by private libraries in about 1973, and I think was the first one to identify Neo-Romantic illustrators as a group. And then we have a masterpiece by John Piper. He was another polymath. He was painter, engraver, critic, writer, and occasional illustrator. And this is a tomb in Oxfordshire, and it was for the Shell Book of Oxfordshire. In the event, it was totally illustrated with photographs that Piper had taken, but he did make a number of drawings from the photographs which he intended to go into the book. Shell preferred to have the photographs. We have 4 examples of work by Barnett Friedman, who's one of my favourite artists. On the outsides, we have 2 greetings Christmas cards that he made for Faber and Faber to send to their customers. We've got Before the Raid, which is from Siegfried Sassoon's Memoirs of an Infantry Officer. And that actually precedes the Neo-Romantic period by quite a few years. I think it's 1932 that was done. But it immediately captures that same sense that Minton has of people full of emotion and colour as well. He was a great lithographer, worked with the Kerman Press. And here we have the cover of a booklet he produced for the Milk Marketing Board on real farmhouse cheese. That's watercolour with ink and watercolour. The other 3 are lithographs. But he was really one of the precursors of the Neo-Romantic movement. And the lithographs are all late 40s, early 50s. And that, I think, is it.